Yeah,
There
reach
you go.
out to them.
Huge, exactly.
Because they're nearby. They're just,
Well, they actually live elsewhere. None of
they
them live
do,
in
they're
DC.
not over in the Dominican house?
No, because they travel so much. So some are in Rome, some are in
Okay.
New York, some are in Providence. Doing all the good work that they do.
Yeah.
Anyway, welcome everyone, and welcome to those who are joining us online. It's a great pleasure to have you joining us for the Dead Sea Scrolls and their enduring legacy, presented by the Museum of the Bible's Dr. Robert Bobby Duke. He's definitely known as Bobby Duke by everyone here. The museum started a wonderful limited exhibition last month. November 22nd, and will continue to September 2026. So you have to go see it on the Dead Sea Scrolls. It's featuring hundreds of priceless artifacts that illuminate the world of Jesus. And the museum has been ever so kind to extend a discount for the admission fee for the CIC community. I'll email everyone who registered and also put it on the YouTube description. But if anybody goes to there to buy a ticket, go just enter in CIC 25 to get 25% off. So go before, I don't know if it ever expires, so who knows. So thank you, Museum of the Bible. So Dr. Bobby Duke will be offering this wonderful presentation, this talk, and it'll be followed by a light, happy half hour afterwards with a little beer and wine, some nosh. But it's my great pleasure to introduce Bobby Duke, who serves as the Chief Curatorial Officer and as the Director of the Scholars Initiative at the Museum of the Bible. He formerly served as a professor in the Honors College and is also a former dean of the School of Theology at Azusa Pacific University. He is the author of The Social Location of the Visions of Amram and Biblical, Hebrew, and Aramaic Dictionary. He is very fluent in many of these languages, so just test him. Bobby earned both his PhD and MA in Near Eastern languages and cultures from UCLA, as well as an MA in Hebrew Bible from Jerusalem University College, and a theology degree from, how do you say that? Multnomah University. Where is that? Portland, Oregon. Okay, would not have guessed. He is also the recipient of a fellowship from the W.F. Albright Institute of Archaeological Research in Jerusalem to work on his dissertation, which focused on Aramaic documents from Qumran. His scholarly writing, especially Dead Sea Scrolls research, is widely respected. Before beginning graduate studies at Hebrew University and UCLA, Bobby taught 6th and 7th grade in Southern California. That probably is the toughest job. I'm going to be honest. So from 2009 to 2012, he also chaired the Service Learning and Biblical Studies Workshop at the annual Society of Biblical Literature meeting. Anyway, he's got an impressive resume, and there's more to find online. But let me just step out of the way so that you can hear Bobby Duke present the Dead Sea Scrolls and their enduring legacy.
Well, thank you so much. I wander a little bit, so I asked if I could do a handheld mic. Back in my days teaching undergrad, I realized if you stayed too still, they would tune out. So you constantly move around and make it happen. So I have a little frog in my throat because Angelica gave me a wonderful little charcuterie board with cheese and everything else before, and here I am. So if I cough a little bit, we will get through it. But again, I have been at the Museum of the Bible officially since October of 24. I do miss my teaching experiences at the college level, so evenings like this is getting me back to my first love. So hopefully you'll learn a lot tonight. How many of you have ever been to Museum of the Bible? Great. Now it's time to come back so you can see the Dead Sea Scrolls. How many of you have been to the Holy Land? All right. Floated in the Dead Sea? All right, so some of the pictures I'm going to see will take you back to your experiences. For all the rest of you, make sure to put it on your bucket list. I was talking to a journalist today, and I was just being asked the question about coming to the Holy Land and what is it like? And I said, for me, it was like seeing TV in black and white versus color. You can watch it in black and white, still get the plot, get everything, you know the storyline, but somehow when you see it firsthand, it just comes to life. So make that one of your goals. Well, how did I get involved in Dead Sea Scrolls all those years ago? When I was in junior high, I felt a strong call to ministry, never wavered through junior high and high school. So when I was in high school, I was like that kid. Everyone knew, you're the good kid. Well, I was going to Joshua Tree to go hiking with some friends in Southern California, and one of my buddy's moms had just read this U.S. News and World Report. Came out in 1991, and it was the cover story about the Dead Sea Scrolls because of a library and garden in Southern California known as the Huntington. Some of you may have gone to the Huntington. If you've been to Southern California, it is truly beautiful. But they had one of the only copies of microfiche of all the scrolls outside of the Holy Land. There was a couple copies of microfiche spread around the world just so there would be a copy of them if the originals ever got destroyed. Well, the new director in 1991 of the Huntington realized that scrolls were found in 1947, and now it's 1991, and they still were not all published. So the director of the Huntington said, if you come to the Huntington Library in San Marino, California, you can research any of the Dead Sea Scrolls you want off of our microfiche. So it really was breaking a monopoly that had been over the scrolls from 1947 to 1991. So for me, getting ready about that time to go into college, I was a year away from college at that time, it was a perfect time to start looking at Dead Sea Scroll scholarship because the access was now available in ways that it had not been before. So fast forward 10 years, I had the opportunity to be in an archaeological dig in Qumran, where the Dead Sea Scrolls are found. So here I am actually inside Cave 4, which is the Mother Lode Cave at Qumran. It was funny, a few weeks ago at the museum, we actually had someone whose grandfather started Jelly Belly. And I happened to just show this picture. He's like, that's my family. We started the Jelly Belly company. I said, well, it was one of my shirts I could just throw away because I was going to get it dirty at the dig. But no, I had such a wonderful experience doing archaeology at Qumran, and I just fell in love with the scrolls. I mean, I fell in love originally with the story of the fact that this gives us our oldest biblical text ever discovered. There really is only a handful of biblical items from a little bit earlier. So for example, there is a little silver amulet that was found in a tomb just west of Jerusalem called the Ketef Hinnom inscription. It is the priestly blessing from number 6 carved into silver that was found in a tomb. It dates back to the 6th century BC. So it's quite a bit older, but it's only that one verse from the book of Numbers that is on the silver. But it was while walking along the aqueduct here at Qumran, where I was chatting with the Israeli archaeologist that we were working with, and I said, if you were about ready to start at UCLA, what would you research when it came to the Dead Sea Scrolls? And he said, very easy. I would focus on any of the Aramaic texts found at Qumran. So I met with my advisor a couple months later in UCLA, and I just told him, I want to study something Aramaic with the Dead Sea Scrolls. So we got out a volume, and we just together selected a text that then I eventually published of my dissertation, The Social Locations of the Visions of Amram. Amram was Moses' father in the biblical text. 2,000 years ago, you had communities like the group at Qumran that actually produced literature based on biblical figures. There's not much that's known about Amram in Scripture. So it was a nice opening. Let's write something fictional. So it really is a fictional text that is written in Aramaic, and it was in 5 copies. So what it says there with 4Q, 543 through 547, is that there are 5 copies of this found in Cave 4 at Qumran. Because the earlier scholars who worked on all the material, they had a system for telling you exactly which cave it came out of and which document it was numbered. That means there was 542 documents that came out of Qumran before this one. It is one that when you're in certain levels of scholarship, you realize that you're writing something that 10 people in the world are going to read. That's always a good humbling moment when you see that, and you can go on Amazon and say, look at that, my book's 2,780,000 or whatever that is down there. But that's how scholarship works. You're writing to a very small group of people, and I think that's why I love teaching undergrad so much, is you have to take this knowledge and actually make it relevant to a wide-ranging audience. But the site of Qumran is on the northwest shore of the Dead Sea. You can see it right here. You have Jerusalem off to the west. You have Masada down to the south. Jerusalem is about 2,500 feet above sea level. The Dead Sea is 1,300 feet below sea level. I had some friends in Jerusalem that would ride their bikes from Jerusalem down to the Dead Sea. I am not impressed. You are coasting the whole way down. If you went from Qumran to Jerusalem, now I will be impressed. But again, the Dead Sea is the lowest spot on the face of the planet. I overheard a tour guide once tell a group, because we are so low here, you cannot get sunburned at the Dead Sea. Not true. My wife came back from a day at a spa at the Dead Sea and was completely torched. So sun travels 9 million miles, and all of a sudden, that last 1,300 feet, we gotcha. No more sunburns. But the site of Qumran, right along the shore of the Dead Sea, is not the ideal place you want to be ever. It is extremely hot, very little water. And as I tell the story a little bit more, you're going to see that the community that chose that site to live were hyper concerned about ritual purity from the book of Leviticus. They were hyper concerned about everything communal. If you're concerned about ritual purity, what is something that you need an abundance of? Water. You need lots of water. So this is not the ideal place for that. But you can see the Dead Sea in the distance. There's a wonderful church on the other side of the Dead Sea in Jordan at a place called Madaba. They have this mosaic map on the floor. And it actually shows all the places that people could go on pilgrimage to the Holy Land. It was made during the Byzantine era. And there's actually fish depicted on the Jordan River swimming down. And the fish that are right by the Dead Sea have this frantic look on their face trying to swim upstream. Nothing can live in the Dead Sea. They found little microbes that can be there, but it really is an interesting place, 10 times saltier than the ocean. Now, the archaeological site of Qumran that's depicted right here, it was known before the scrolls were found. Scholars knew there was an archaeological site there, but they didn't have any biblical connection to it. And because the scrolls had not been found, there was almost an attitude of, we'll get to it eventually, but there's nothing of significance here. That all changed when the scrolls were found, because some of the scrolls caves you can only access if you go through the settlement. There are some scholars out there that have tried to argue that the scroll caves and the settlement have nothing to do with each other. But again, you can only get to some of the caves coming through the settlement, so they are definitely connected. Now you can see from this picture that it is now a major tourist site. When you tour that part of the world, people will often leave Jerusalem. They'll stop at Qumran. They'll float in the Dead Sea. They'll go down to Masada and then maybe go somewhere else along the Dead Sea. But this site is one that is now a major site because of the scrolls that were found. Now, at the archaeological site itself, most would argue that the site was probably used by some other entity before the group took it over, who we call the Essenes. There is debates on who the group was, but I think there's a strong argument to be made that the Essenes that are known from Josephus were the group that lived there at Qumran. But this major tower in the north side of the settlement has made an argument that there must have been a military purpose for this building originally. Some have suggested maybe the Hasmoneans, the Maccabees, used it in their fight against the Seleucids or others. But eventually it was taken over by this community at Qumran that was known for copying scrolls, known for being very communal, according to Josephus and Pliny and other ancient writers. But there was no text found inside the archaeological settlement. Now, the site was destroyed by the Romans in 68 AD, 2 years before Jerusalem was destroyed in 70 AD, and it was burned. So most likely then any written material on leather or papyrus that was in the building just got destroyed. But in this room here, there were inkwells that were found. Now, archaeology is an interpretive science. When it comes to archaeology, the ancient people were not kind to us. If they were kind to us, they would have known they were going to be destroyed. They would have left us a note that said, this is how this room was used. They did not care for us to know that. But again, archaeology found numerous inkwells in this room and said this may have been where the scriptorium, where they copied texts at the site of Qumran. Moving on, you have another large room that scholars call the dining room. Largest room in the settlement, many people could be there, but it wasn't just the fact that it's the largest room, it's the fact that Father DeVoe, the archaeologist who dug there in the 1950s, found a room right next door with dozens and dozens of pottery bowls. I mean, what other room would need that many pottery bowls, but somewhere where you were serving something like a meal? We do know from Josephus and other ancient writers that this group of Essenes were incredibly communal and had very kind of ritualistic practices for even going through the ritual bath before you ate, go through the ritual bath before you read biblical texts, and others. But like I said, it was not the settlement that kind of captured the attention. It was the caves that were found all along the settlement. And the first couple caves were actually about a half a mile up the valley. Cave 1, as the story goes, a Bedouin shepherd was out looking for goats, threw some rocks into a hole in the ground, heard a crash, and realized he needed to come back later and find out what was there. Thus, Cave 1 was discovered. Inside Cave 1, the Great Isaiah Scroll. There was also a second Isaiah Scroll. There were a few non-biblical texts that were also found there, including this commentary on the book of Habakkuk. I mean, some really fascinating things. The Great Isaiah Scroll, though, is probably the most treasured of all Dead Sea Scrolls found in Cave 1. It has actually not been on display in Israel at the Israel Museum for a couple decades, and they're going to bring it out in 2026 for 3 months. Only 3 months. And even the fragments we have at the museum from the Israel Antiquities Authority will come to us. We'll have 3 sets of 8 between now and next September. Because once a fragment is displayed, in 3 months it has to go back to Israel and it is put in a climate-controlled and a light-controlled vault for 5 years. Sometimes I like to hibernate for 5 years. That'd be nice. But it'll go back to Israel. It'll sit there. And the Great Isaiah Scroll found in Cave 1 is one of those ones that in 2026 will have a very short window that it will fully be displayed, all 24 feet of a text. So it'd go almost all the way across this room. So up here is where then Cave 1 and 2 were found. And what I've done is in the corner, either on the right or the left, I've put a picture of a Bedouin, or on the left, I put a picture of Father DeVoe, the archaeologist who excavated at Qumran. Because it was a race. Once the Bedouin found out that people were very interested in these texts, once they found out people would pay money for these texts, it became a race to find out who was going to get to the next cave. And almost every one of the caves, once the archaeologists and scholars found out where the Bedouin had been looking, they would go back and find even more material. So Cave 1, for example, right up here, looks like just a hole in the rock, but this is inside the cave. Now, the height of the ground when the Bedouin first went in was near the shoulder of this person standing there. So they went in and excavated down another several feet, because over 2,000 years, from wind and dust, guano, and other things that come into a cave, there was items that needed to be excavated. The third cave that was found by Father DeVoe, was found a little bit farther up from the settlement even than caves 1 and 2. And this is where the Great Copper Scroll was found. The Copper Scroll today is on display in Amman, Jordan. What's interesting about just even the whole discovery of the scrolls and the history of the scrolls, it really plays into all the geopolitical realities that are still today. In 1967, when you had the war between Jordan and Israel and all that conclude, you then had Israel overseeing East Jerusalem, the West Bank, and other places. Well, there were texts on display in Amman, Jordan, when that war ended, and those texts are still in Amman, Jordan today. To my knowledge, there's only been one time where there's been a Dead Sea Scrolls display in North America where texts from Jordan and Israel were put back in the same exhibit. That was in San Diego in 2007. And at that time, the Great Copper Scroll was put on display. Now, why is it called the Copper Scroll? It literally is inscribed on copper. It's a treasure map. It's a treasure map of dozens of treasures that people have tried to determine, are these the temple treasures that were hidden before the Romans came? What is this? Is it reality? Is it fantasy. There was a fictional book written not too long ago called The Copper Scroll that said, once we decipher the Copper Scroll, we'll find the Ark of the Covenant, then we'll have World War III, and blah, 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 blah. I mean, it is one where Dead Sea Scrolls almost elicits fanciful thinking. It's like King Tut's treasures. Like everyone wants to know if you find this or that, or the Ark of the Covenant, or the Holy Grail. These kinds of things, just imagine. People have very imaginative thoughts. I was sitting on a flight once, started talking to the person next to me, and when she found out I was a graduate student at UCLA focused on Dead Sea Scrolls, she said, "You would love the book I'm reading right now." Maybe. I said, "Well, what book are you reading?" She said, "I'm reading this book called The Copper Scroll." Complete fictional account that I just mentioned, where it ends with this great battle that's there and all that. And I was reminded of one of my professors at Hebrew University who told me in the 1980s, before 1991, he was approached by a publisher who said, "We know we can sell a lot of books if it has Dead Sea Scrolls somewhere in the title. We don't care if it's true." I mean, before 1991, there was this attitude of just say something, because it's one where there was not the evidence that scholars had access to. Cave 4 is the Mother Lode Cave. Well over 80% of all texts found at Qumran were found inside Cave 4. My dissertation came out of this cave. You will see in a minute that over 137 biblical texts came out of that cave. Originally found by the Bedouin, once again excavated by scholars, and even more texts were found in Cave 4. Now today, there is at times questions of when the Bedouin found something, was it actually found in that cave or not? Because like I said with ancients, that they didn't tell us what they used their rooms for, the Bedouins weren't concerned about documenting perfectly latitude, longitude, heights, elevations. They just went in, grabbed things, and came out. So did all of this come out of Cave 4? I think so, but we'll never really know for sure because the Bedouins didn't do controlled archaeological excavations, unlike the Father DeVoe and his group. Here's inside Cave 4. So it's not very large, and to think 137 biblical texts plus other texts were found in here. It truly is amazing. Cave 5 is just this little hole in the rock. I think when I was first exposed to Dead Sea Scrolls back when I was in high school, I had this Carlsbad Caverns kind of perspective. That this was caves that go on for miles and they just kept finding more and more scrolls. Some of the caves literally are just holes in the rock. But it gives you that sense that these were quickly hidden as they were getting out of the way of the Romans. Qumran was destroyed in 68 AD, Jerusalem was destroyed in 70 AD, and Masada was destroyed in 72 AD. So somewhere around 68, this group at Qumran probably said, "We need to get out of here. Let's hide our texts, let's leave, and then we'll come back later and get our text and just pick up life once the Romans pass by." Unfortunate for them, they never came back and got their texts. For the history of literature and scholarship, it's good they never came back and got their texts, because they probably would have just disappeared. It is possible that some of the people left Qumran and went down to Masada. Why is that possible? There is a text called the Song of the Sabbath Sacrifice that was found at Qumran and at Masada. Nowhere else in the world. This text has 13 different psalms that were read on 13 different Sabbaths in a kind of priestly sort of way. So if it's only found in these two locations, the argument is that some people at Qumran took some of the most important texts to them, went down to Masada, and that they happened to then be caught up in the deaths there were at Masada. Cave 6, just a little hole in the rock here. Cave 7, Cave 8, and then Cave 9 is also right there. Cave 10, and then the final cave, Cave 11, was found in 1956. So what began in 1947 of finding scrolls did not end until 1956. I think that was another misunderstanding I had, that they just went in a short season, found all these texts, and then started researching them. But it really was this race between the Bedouin. And at the end of the day, if you were counting, the Bedouin won. The Bedouin found many more caves than the scholars. Now, I'm often asked, is there a cave 12. In 2017, and you can even type in Cave 12 Qumran, and you'll see hundreds of thousands of news articles that were written, because they did find a cave not too far from here that had some leather items in the cave, but no written material on that leather. So until there's written material, the Dead Sea Scrolls community won't call it a Cave 12. It is a cave that just produced archaeological artifacts to consider. Because we do know that some of this leather, it could be sandal leather, it could have been used for other things, because the same, some goats gave their lives for shoes, and some goats gave their lives for texts to be written. So what happened after the discovery? All the material was taken to East Jerusalem, to a place called the Palestine Archaeological Museum. An archaeological museum started during the British Mandate period, and it was the British kind of Palestine Archaeological Museum, but it was later named in 1967 to the Rockefeller Museum. But the Rockefellers actually gave money in the 1930s to build the building. They gave $2 million in the 1930s to build the building. I mean, I don't know if someone could do the math and figure out what that'd be today, but that's a pretty hefty sum in the 1930s as you're thinking part of the Depression and everything else to build this building right here. All the items were taken here. And again, it happened so fast, particularly when they hit Cave 4. When they hit Cave 4 in the early 50s, they didn't have the team assembled to work on that many items. And when I say that many items, scholars today will say somewhere north of 900 different documents came out of these 11 caves. These are 900 different documents that are mostly very fragmentary. So think of having 900 puzzles that you throw all the pieces on the ground, throw away 2/3 of the pieces, and then say, now tell me about all the puzzles. The biblical texts were the easy ones to work on because we already knew from the Masoretic text what something should say. So it was easier to discover. When I've taught some of my Hebrew students back in the day, I'd play a game with them just to have some fun, as I would give them, that I printed from websites that I have access to, Dead Sea Scrolls fragments that I knew came from very popular biblical texts. And I would say, okay, with the concordance, go find out where this is from. And again, even an undergrad, figuring out 2 or 3 words in the same line can figure out which biblical text. The harder texts were the ones that were not known before in the history of literature. So you're having to start. Because here's what they were working on. Yes, there was the Great Isaiah Scroll. Yes, there was one from Cave 11 called the Temple Scroll, a very long scroll. But most of it here, extremely fragmentary. So you would have these scholars work and look at one table and see fragments with handwriting and try to see, does this match that one over there or that one over there? These items would often come in, particularly the ones the Bedouin found, in boxes. They would just bring in boxes of fragments that you would have to start to sort. So what are the Dead Sea Scrolls? We have 4 basic categories of text. Books from the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible. Nothing in the New Testament was found among the Dead Sea Scrolls. Again, these texts were being copied and read before and during the life of Christ. I mean, that's something for me, I always have to pinch myself to say, you're looking at something in this climate-controlled case at Museum of the Bible that is 2,000 years old. Many years ago, my wife and I were in Philadelphia, went to Independence Hall, and went to see the Liberty Bell and all those kinds of things. Here's guards all around it. You can't get anywhere near it. I'm like, this is only like 250 years old. This isn't old. I mean, I had just been an archaeological digger where we're throwing away Bronze Age stuff. It does give you this sense of how much history, because some of the text among the Dead Sea Scrolls go back to the 2nd, maybe 3rd century BC. And some of them we know are from the 1st century AD. That's over 200 years of text they were preserving in their library at Qumran. You also have some of the deuterocanonical books that I'll mention in a little bit. Pseudepigraphical works, these are ones like my dissertation, that it was ones that were just written 2,000 years ago about a biblical figure. I mean, we still do that today. Have any of you ever watched the show The Chosen? There are things in The Chosen that is not in the Bible exactly. Could it have happened this way? Maybe, but we have to fill in the pieces when we have questions. We have at the museum right now a children's activity that I'll tell you about in a minute called the Dead Sea Squirrels. Not squirrels, squirrels. but it's a current children's book series that is being published by people who used to do Veggie Tales to kind of tell the story to children about finding ancient texts and all of that. Then you also have other texts. These would be ones that were unique to this community. We have the whole rule book called the community rule that this community used for entry into the community, how you lived in the community, even kind of for punishments or other things that were there. So when it comes to the Hebrew Bible, all the books have been found except Esther and Nehemiah. I think Nehemiah was definitely part of their library because we found Ezra. Ezra and Nehemiah, if you've ever read both of those together, they're talking about the same time period, they're connected, and they were often written on one scroll throughout the history of scribal practice. Esther's a little bit different. We don't know why it's not there. But again, books like Ezra show up in one fragment, one copy about the size of a silver dollar. So maybe just little critters in the caves over the years ate Esther. We don't know. So when we look at the biblical text, our best Hebrew manuscripts before the scrolls were found were from about 1000 AD. I mean, that's 1,000 years after the time of Christ. That's many years of manuscript transmission. Books of the Hebrew Bible written hundreds of years BC. Think of a book like Samuel or Kings or others. But when the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered, it shaved off over 1,000 years of manuscript transmission. Now, in general, the Dead Sea Scrolls biblical text and the Masoretic text from 1,000 years later are not too dissimilar. There are some variants in various places, but in general, there are no variants that are touching on any major Jewish or theological or Christian doctrine. So what you don't have is a text that says, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You don't have one that says, the Lord our God, the Lord is Baal and Asherah. Like, you don't have any kind of variants like that. You have other things. So, for example, the height of Goliath. In 4Q Samuel A, the height of Goliath is 4 cubits and a span, which is about 6.5 feet tall. Masoretic text later on had 6 cubits in a span. So how 4 got changed to 6, it's still very tall. I mean, for me, 6.5 feet is still tall. 2,000 years ago, 6.5 feet was really tall. But again, you do have some variants that have to be accounted for, but in general, no major variants. In fact, in the Dead Sea Scrolls Bible, it's a scholarly version that just takes all the manuscripts of the Bible, translates them all in English, and presents them. They have a note at 1 Samuel 10 and 1 Samuel 11 that says this is the most significant variant in the Dead Sea Scrolls, and it's a couple extra sentences about an Ammonite king named Nahash who liked to cut fingers and toes when he captured people. Junior hires love it. That's a great thing to be added back in. But again, Josephus told us about that. Everyone thought Josephus elaborated until they found 4Q Samuel A and realized there was this extra sentence that somehow fell out because the word, I think it was Ammonite, was repeated twice. Someone goes along, looks up, looks down, skips, and they keep going. All of these variants can be explained in kind of logical ways. Now, when you look at the whole manuscript distribution, just by looking here, this is the number of copies of a given biblical book that's been found at Qumran. What was the most popular book? Deuteronomy, Psalms, Isaiah, Exodus. But the most popular was the book of Psalms. 36 different copies of the book of Psalms have been found in the 11 caves. We have one on display right now at Museum of the Bible. It's part of this 36. What's fascinating is if you take the quotes in the New Testament. So you know in the New Testament it'll say the book of Isaiah says, and then it'll quote from Isaiah or it'll quote from Deuteronomy. The 5 books that are most quoted in the New Testament are the 5 most popular books right here. 2,000 years ago, this community at Qumran copied certain books more than others, and those are the exact same books that are quoted most in the New Testament at the same time, which makes a lot of sense when it comes to books like Isaiah. This was a time 2,000 years ago that people were having high messianic expectation. They were waiting for the Messiah, that you get some of that from a book like Isaiah. Now for the caves, cave 4 by far, biblical texts. 137 of all the biblical texts that were discovered were found in Cave 4 alone. Some of the caves didn't have any biblical texts, like Caves 9 and Caves 10. For deuterocanonical books, Ecclesiasticus, Ben Sira, was found among the Dead Sea Scrolls. You have pseudepigraphical texts, like I said, Visions of Amram or Jubilees. The book of Jubilees is in the Ethiopic canon. So the Ethiopian church actually has the book of Jubilees as part of their canon, and it was found in dozens of copies at Qumran. And then you have some of these other texts like the Community Rule, that, and you even have texts that are receipts. You have even just correspondences. So just other texts that aren't necessarily religious in nature, or they are part of this community's identity. Now, one of the concerns early on, as the research started happening, is are items being destroyed? Are items not being carefully conserved? But in 1950, conservation levels were at a whole different era. I was talking with Angelica beforehand because I showed her this picture. And in the 1950s, we had doctors here in the United States that talked about the health benefits of smoking. I mean, welcome to a time when we did not have science the way we have today. So here we have Father Millick holding fragments with a bare hand while smoking a cigarette. When I think today that a text can only be out of Israel for 3 months and it has to go hibernate for 5 years, we've come a long way. As it says here, the conditions in the PAM, Palestine Archaeological Museum, could be described at best as primitive. Scholars never had enough room to work, and there were no assistants provided. Worst of all, there was no attention to issues of conservation and preservation. Scotch tape or the gummed edges of postage stamp sheets were used to attach fragments as they were being assembled. Sunlight was allowed to stream into the room and to bathe the ancient manuscripts, leading to further decay. Coffee cups and cigarettes were not an uncommon sight. Thus, by 1991, people like William Moffat at the Huntington said, we got to get this research out there. We can't let this keep going, because this is what Dead Sea Scrolls research and conservation looks like today. Everything is very sterile and very managed. So when I talk about these being 2nd century BC, 1st century BC, 1st century, how do scholars know? I mean, how do we really know? Particularly items that the Bedouin pulled out of caves that we didn't have any other archaeology. Because archaeology dating is often done with ceramics, coins, and other things, even date pits or olive seeds that they can do, olive pits that they can do carbon dating on. But for the Dead Sea Scrolls, they did then excavate the settlement, and through coins and all those, they could get a site of the settlement. But scholars got very good at what's called paleography. And what is paleography? It's looking at how letters change over time. Today, we go on our word processors, and you can choose one of 1,000 fonts. Back 2,000 years ago, you did not have that individualism. You were taught to write a letter this way, and we all write the letter this way. Your own little flourishes was not how scribes did it 2,000 years ago. Uniformity versus having individuality was that. So this chart at the top are the oldest texts. The ones at the bottom are the newest texts, and by newest, 1st century AD. But this is the art of paleography, and scholars got really good at saying, if a sheen, which is this letter here, is written that way versus written this way, it's from this era and not that era. It's really, it's interesting to think of how kind of even the way letters slowly change over time can be an indicator of the age of a manuscript. So when you come to the museum, see the scrolls, you'll see on the display something where it'll say 2nd century BC, or it'll say things like early Hasmonean or Herodian, because they would even say that this was a text copied during Herod and his kids and all of that. The displays we have at the museum have the main text in the middle. To the left is the natural light photograph, what it would look like under natural light. And then we have a photograph of infrared, because there are texts that have kind of darkened so much over time, the natural light makes it very hard to read. Now, for any of you who are really interested, this website out of Israel, deadseascrolls.org.il, has a ton, almost all the Dead Sea Scrolls that are, you can look at the pictures, you can zoom in. So when you go back to 1991, when very few scholars in the world had access, today, when anyone in the world can log on and see whatever they want. It truly is amazing. So let me just run through real quick the 8 texts we have currently at the museum, just to give you a sense. My personal favorite is 4Q7. So what cave did it come out of? Cave 4. It's the 7th numbered document coming out of that cave. Was it the actual 7th one discovered? We don't know. But what scholars did is they reserved the first group of numbers for any biblical text. So out of any cave, if any Genesis was found, it'll be one of the first numbers. So 4Q7 was the 7th copy G of the book of Genesis. This one is so significant because it actually has the very first words in all of Scripture. The very first words in all of Scripture. God created the heavens and the earth. It was written in Hebrew, and you can see scholars have identified that it is a late Hasmonean formal hand. This is the scholarly way of saying about 50 BC. 50 years before the time of Christ, this text was being written and read. So here's what it looks like in natural light. And that line right there, starting right over here in the margin, comes here. This is the word for God. So Bereshit, bara Elohim, et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. And God created the heavens and the earth. This is our earliest copy of the first lines of the book of Genesis. Truly stunning. We have a Psalms text, Psalms A, 4Q83. The reason why it's 83, even though Psalms isn't the 83rd book in the Bible, is because there were so many Genesis and Exodus and Leviticus copies out of K4 that to get to the first Psalms, it was already 83 text into the cave. This has sections from Psalms 5 through Psalm 69. So you can see all of these Psalms here show up on that fragment. And this one dates back to the 2nd century BC. 2nd century BC. I mean, around the time of the Maccabees, which is pretty stunning. Here's where it's at. And just so you know, when it comes to Dead Sea Scrolls scholarship, what scholars often want to know always happens to be right there. It really is one where whole dissertations have been written over the lacuna, like what is missing, and that's what we want to be interested in. For tonight, though, this one little fragment I will zoom in so you can see. And we talked about kind of the enduring impact. And for me, one of the enduring legacies of the Dead Sea Scrolls is that I today, when I read my book of Psalms, when I hear Psalms read at my faith community, it's the same book that 2,000 years ago they were reading at Qumran to find inspiration and encouragement. So in the red box is the section from Psalm 38. Come quickly to help me, my Lord and Savior. Same words that we still have in Psalm 38 today. Or Psalm 71. So in this fragment, you had Psalm 38 up here and then Psalm 71 here. Deliver me, my God, from the hand of the wicked. I don't think scholars fully know why we have a different ordering on this Psalms manuscript. I think it might be a greatest hits. That certain Psalms texts where they're in different orders, whoever the scribe was, they were writing their favorite Psalms in a certain order, like many of us with our Spotify lists. We may have the same songs, but they're all in different order because we like this song better than that one just for personal enjoyment. 11Q10, the Targum of Job. The word Targum is a fancy word for an Aramaic translation. Most of the biblical books written in Hebrew. The book of Daniel is about half in Aramaic. There is one verse in Aramaic in Genesis, one verse of Aramaic in Jeremiah, and then half of Ezra is also in Aramaic. Everything else is Hebrew. But the book of Job in its original Hebrew is really difficult Hebrew. So it makes sense that even at Qumran, they would have an Aramaic translation to make it a little easier to read. Not too long after the destruction of the temple, Aramaic translations became very popular among the Dead Sea Scrolls, or among texts being copied. This is Aramaic, and here's a picture of what it looks like. All right. Next one, 4Q174. It is a commentary on a whole range of biblical texts. A fancy word that scholars first used for this was a florilegium, which is an anthology. But all of these biblical verses are on this fragment right here. But they're smattered around with actually commentary in various places. There's a text on display right now of Enoch. Enoch in the Bible is known in a very small part of his genealogy. We have the phrase that said, and Enoch walked with God and was seen no more because God took him. Oh, that's just a wonderful invitation to try to fill in the gaps. And there was 2,000 years ago, a lot of people that got very interested in the figure of Enoch. It also is Aramaic. And that's what it looks like. This one is written in if you look at it, very straight lines. And we know there was something before because you have a seam right there with another piece that was before it somewhere. Text 4Q434, Barki Nafshi, which in Hebrew means, bless the Lord, O my soul. It shows up in Psalm 103, Psalm 104. This is not a biblical text, but it takes that same phraseology and weaves it in. Because just like different faith communities have their different hymnals, this group at Qumran wrote their own hymns also. And this would be a good example of that. And here's where it looks like, natural light. And then the final couple scrolls, the War Scroll, 4Q491. It's called the War Scroll. It is a text that is only known at Qumran, and it talked about this cosmic battle between the group at Qumran and a group called the Kittim. The Kittim are most likely the Romans. They saw that they were going to rise up as a community and throw off the yoke of the Romans. All right, and the last text in this first set at the museum of 8 is the Temple Scroll, 11Q20. It is a rewriting of the book of Deuteronomy, putting it in first person instead of third. So it's kind of interesting, taking the book of Deuteronomy where it said, and God said, it would be, and I say. Kind of a way to make it a little bit more personal for the reader for the book of Deuteronomy. Also written in Hebrew, 1st century AD is when it comes from. And here's what it looks like. And this one you can clearly see the ruling lines. Ancient Hebrew, they hung their letters from the line rather than set their letters on the line. Today, a kindergartner or first grader, you'll learn your ABCs by making sure the letter is perfectly sitting on the line. For ancient Hebrew, you would actually hang the letters from the line because outside of this one letter, Lamed, all of them had a nice ceiling that could just be dropped right from the line. So that's the Dead Sea Scrolls. But the exhibit is so much more than that. So let me just quickly fly through a couple things in the exhibit. Do we have any Aggies in the room? No Aggies? I had an Aggie. I was talking recently and someone's like, I'm an Aggie. They had a really rough loss for any of you that watch college football. Well, the reason why I put this here is because one of the other items in the first part of the exhibit is pieces of wood from a boat that was found in the Sea of Galilee. How the exhibit is designed, and it was designed by our curator friends at the Israel Antiquities Authority, it starts at the Sea of Galilee, then it goes to a place called Magdala, then it goes down to Jerusalem, and then it goes down to the caves of Qumran. Well, there was a scholar, Shelley Vaxman, at Texas A&M, who is a nautical archaeologist. I mean, I thought Chief Curatorial Officer sounds fun, but nautical archaeology takes it to a whole nother level. But he was brought in when they found a boat in 1986 when the Sea of Galilee had dropped precipitously low. And they knew they were going to find this boat. We actually have pieces from this boat on display there. It tells the whole story of that. The exhibit, here's for the whole boat. You can go today to the northwest shore of the Sea of Galilee and see the whole boat. Next part of the exhibit is Magdala. Back in 2009, they were building a Catholic retreat center on the western shore of the Sea of Galilee at the site of Magdala, hometown of Mary Magdalene. At this site, as they were starting to construction, one of their heavy machinery hit a huge piece of limestone. They stopped the construction, they did an excavation, and realized they had discovered a first century synagogue. And that big piece of limestone that was hit was a table that most people would say was used for rolling out Torah scrolls on Shabbat, on Sabbath. Here's the site today, and now here's the whole retreat center. So you have the synagogue here, and then this area now has a whole hotel and retreat center. This chapel is truly amazing, and the chapel is dedicated to women in the Bible. They have this rotunda with columns, and on every column is a name of someone from Scripture, Mary, Judith, and others. They have one column that's blank, and they will always bring people there and say, this is for all of you women who's still part of this theological story. It's a really powerful place. And here's the limestone table. There's a big chunk out of it right here where that backhoe hit it. But first time this has ever been on display on the East Coast. One of the art pieces at Magdala that I always have to put up because it's inspiring to me is how human it is, but also so touching, of the woman touching the hem of Jesus' garment. Such a powerful, and it's about as big as that wall over there. It's a huge picture. There's also a section of the exhibit that talks about Masada, this palace complex that King Herod built. And we also have our Dead Sea Squirrels. Around our museum, for any of you who've been there, we have these little children's kiosks that they can play games. Well, we reached out to a group out of Lipscomb University in Nashville that has created a new children's book series called the Dead Sea Squirrels. And there's now an interactive game where kids can put fragments back together by hand motion. It's all just hand motion. So they're like capturing things and moving it around. So it's quite fun. But let me just throw in one more, and then we'll take time for Q&A. We had in our Dead Sea Scrolls gallery, before we had to clear it out to get it ready for the Dead Sea Scrolls, a mosaic from the site of Megiddo in Israel. It was found in a prison. It is a mosaic that is the earliest church ever discovered archaeologically. It was supposed to already be moved on to another location. That fell through, so we renegotiated to keep it for another year, and it's on our first floor. So right now at Museum of the Bible, you can see the earliest church ever discovered archaeologically dates to 230 AD, and you can see the earliest biblical text ever discovered. There's nowhere else in the world that can claim that right now. Now, what's interesting about this church, it was found right here in this excavation. This is an artistic reconstruction. But the mosaic floor from 230 was taken out of the ground, conserved, and shipped here to Museum of the Bible. Here's what it looks like, and the key is the 3 inscriptions. It's clearly a Christian site when I show you the inscriptions, but this is a time before the cross became the symbol for Christianity. The first couple centuries, the fish was the symbol of Christianity for a couple reasons. Called to be fishers of men. Probably the most famous miracle is the fish and loaves. But also the phrase, Jesus Christ, Son of God, Savior. If you take the first letter of each of those words, it spells the Greek word ichthus, which is the word fish. So fish was the symbol. But it's the different inscriptions that are on here that clearly makes this a Christian church. Gaianus, also called Porphyrius, centurion, our brother, has made the payment at his own expense as an act of liberality. Borussia has carried out the work. Now, the Gaianus inscription are the big letters. The one here talking about carrying out the work are the little letters. Now, I don't think that's because they chose a smaller font size to show that this is a lesser important person than the centurion. I think there was originally supposed to be some kind of artistic depiction here, over here, a heart, a flower, something, and we'll never know. But I think Gaianus came in and said, that's great that you're honoring me, but I didn't do this. This guy did it. Put his name there too. You have arguably one of the most powerful people in this area, the centurion, and a workman on this same inscription. On the other side of the mosaic floor, you have this inscription that just says, remember Pramila, Syriaca, Dorothea, and moreover also Creste. Why are they to be remembered? Were they martyrs? Were they also philanthropists? We don't know, but they're to be remembered. But we have 2 men and 4 women mentioned so far on this mosaic floor. The final inscription, and theologically the most important inscription, is this one right here. The God-loving Akeptus has offered the table to God Jesus Christ as a memorial. And the word God is here, Jesus is here, and Christ is here, written in shortened forms with that line over it, which is exactly the same way in the 3rd century AD, the manuscripts from that time also wrote those theophoric names. This is the earliest statement of the divinity of Christ outside of Scripture. Now, when we were writing the script for this exhibit that we've now moved to our first floor, we had some arguments back and forth of what should we call this? Should it be called a church? Should it be called a chapel? Should it be called a prayer hall? What should it be called? We finally convinced them church is probably the most accurate from a North American perspective, and it has more marketing quality. So, hey, at the end of the day, you got to market things. But it was going back and forth because some of our collaborators in Israel said it doesn't have the indicative features of a church. It's not oriented east-west. It doesn't have aisles. It doesn't have a baptistry. And we said, that is true after Constantine. after basilicas started to be built. This was a time 100 years before Constantine. Truly amazing. And I did have to tell our friends, I said, you have to realize some of our guests come to the museum too, and when they go to church, they can see basketball hoops or other things. Not my church. I like having something that feels set apart. But again, this was a place where Jesus was worshiped. There was a table in the middle of the room for the Eucharist. And you have the divinity of Christ being talked about right on the floor. Now, I was coming through the exhibit, a few months ago with a group of Greek Orthodox priests. I realized I had to be on my A game because they could actually read that. Some of our guests, I can just make stuff up. No, just kidding. But they got so excited when they saw this word right here, trapeza, trapesan, because it is the word still today in Greek Orthodoxy they use for the Eucharist. Because I just said, and the Eucharist would have been there. They said, no, the holy trapeza, the holy table. And it was one where I was just touched to my heart that here they get to see the word that they still call it today, 1,800 years later, right there on the mosaic floor. So with that, I will stop, answer any questions, and then I know we need to get to the happy half hour. Is that right? So.
Correct.
All right, so we have questions here. I think Angelica's going to bring the microphone up.
Yep, so the folks can hear you who are tuning in through the live stream.
Thank you. A great presentation.
Oh,
thank you so much. Is there any reference to Mary of Magdalene in that church or in any artifacts that were discovered that reference her specifically?
So in the excavation there of the synagogue, no references to Mary Magdalene. I don't know if there was any written material found. We have this limestone table that has images on the outside, like has a menorah and some other things. But I don't know if there was any like pottery with writing on it or anything like that. I feel that Jesus would have probably gone into that synagogue. It's from the 1st century. Even some of the coins date to about 30 AD, which would have been the time. We have in Mark and Matthew verses that say that Jesus went to the synagogues in the Galilee, and Magdala is just a mile or two away from Capernaum, Bethsaida. So for me, again, we'll never know for sure, but you can stand there and say, this is exactly what a synagogue would have looked like at the time. And it was a square room. Everyone sat around the outside looking at each other. And to me, I think that's a beautiful imagery of really this kind of communal nature of all of that. Because we often today can have just even the way we sit in church, it's like we don't see each other, whereas they would have been looking right at each other as they're discussing and talking, reading Torah and everything else.
Well, thank you. Okay, one more question.
Did you carbon date the boat? And do you know what the consolidant was in preserving the boat?
So I'll have to get back to you. I'll give you my card and I have a book back in my office that's all about the discovery of the boat. It really is fascinating. It reads like a kind of a detective novel of how they were going to get this all done. I don't know if they did carbon dating of the wood. I think they may have. But the style of building, of doing that boat, it all dates back to that time period. But I don't know if they found coins or anything else in it that would have given it a solid date. But the size of the boat, and then when you read the gospel accounts of, say, storms on the Sea of Galilee, you can realize why they were so scary, because these boats are not very big when you see that. So thank you. All right, Angelica.
I think we've hit the end of our talk tonight. I would please some applause for Dr. Duke. Thank you. Thank you so much, Bobby. And by the way, I visited the Megiddo display, and it's incredible, and I can't wait to go see the Dead Sea Scrolls. Just as a friendly reminder, those from the CIC community can get a 25% discount on the admission ticket, so just use CIC 25. But now it's time for our happy half hour. Please do check out our upcoming event schedule, which includes our Christmas party next week, as well as our event recollection. But please come out for a glass of wine and beer.